Grandpa faces the heartbreaking decision to put down his beloved horse, Bella, the last living memory of his late wife. With no money to pay for her treatment, he prepares for a painful goodbye. But just as he's ready to let go, the vet steps in with an unexpected offer. What's the vet's plan? And how far will Grandpa go to save the horse he loves? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. The winter sun barely pierced through the heavy gray clouds as James pulled his worn wool coat tighter around his shoulders. His boots crunched against the frozen ground as he made his way to the barn, each step heavy with purpose. The old red structure, weathered by decades of storms, stood as a silent guardian to his most precious companion. Inside, Bella's labored breathing echoed through the wooden walls. James's weathered hands trembled slightly as he poured her morning feed into the metal bucket. "Here you go, girl," he whispered, his voice catching in his throat as Bella lifted her head weakly. The mare's once glossy white coat had dulled, and her eyes, though still gentle, carried a weariness that broke James's heart. She nuzzled his hand softly, but even that small gesture seemed to tax her strength. Back in the farmhouse, James's gaze drifted to the photograph hanging above the fireplace. Sarah, his late wife, sat proudly atop Bella, both of them adorned with white flowers from their wedding day. The image captured a moment of pure joy. Sarah's laugh, Bella's proud stance, the summer sunshine making everything glow. Now, 23 years later, the photo served as a bittersweet reminder of happier times. The stack of bills on his kitchen table seemed to mock him. On top lay Dr. Thompson's report from last week, its clinical words spelling out what James already knew in his heart. Bella's condition was worsening, and the treatment costs were far beyond what his modest farm income could cover. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Mrs. Carter, his neighbor of 15 years, stood on his porch with a covered pot in her hands. Her kind face creased with concern as she handed him the homemade soup. "Thought you could use something warm today, James," she said softly. Her eyes searched his face, silently asking the questions he couldn't bear to answer. "Thank you, Margaret. You shouldn't have troubled yourself," James replied, forcing a small smile. "No trouble at all." She hesitated, then added, "How's Bella doing?" James looked away, focusing on the steam rising from the soup pot. "She's resting," he said simply, unable to share the weight of what was coming. As evening approached, James sat in his old armchair by the window, watching Bella through the frost-covered glass. The barn light cast a warm glow around her stall, where she stood quietly, her breath visible in the cold air. With trembling fingers, he reached for the phone and dialed Dr. Harper's number. Each ring felt like a hammer to his heart. "Yes, tomorrow morning would be best," he managed to say, his voice barely above a whisper. After hanging up, James pulled on his boots once more and walked out to the barn. He picked up Bella's brush, the one Sarah had always used, and began gentle strokes along her neck. "I'm so sorry, old girl," he whispered, his words mixing with the sound of her breathing and the winter wind outside. "I'm so sorry." The morning dawned bitter and gray as James prepared for the hardest journey of his life. His hands shook as he fastened Bella's halter, each movement deliberate and gentle. The familiar routine felt different today, heavier, final. The old truck's engine grumbled to life, sending puffs of white exhaust into the frozen air. James stood beside the trailer, watching Bella for a moment. Her coat caught the weak winter light as she stood in the barnyard, and for a brief second, he saw her as she once was, young and strong, racing across the green summer fields with boundless energy. Now her steps were slow and measured, each breath a visible struggle in the cold. Before loading her, James went back to the tack room. There, hanging on its special hook, was Sarah's favorite bridle. The leather was still supple from years of careful maintenance, the brass fittings dulled but clean. He lifted it carefully, running his fingers over the worn spots where Sarah's hands had gripped it countless times. Without thinking too hard about why, he brought it along, placing it gently in the trailer beside Bella. At the veterinary clinic, the fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the linoleum floors. Dr. Harper's office felt too small, too sterile for such a momentous decision. James sat heavily in the chair across from her desk, his worn cap twisted in his hands. "I know this isn't easy," Dr. Harper said softly, her kind eyes meeting his. "But you're making a compassionate choice, James." As if sensing the gravity of the moment, Bella stretched her neck toward James from where she stood in the examination area. Her soft muzzle brushed his shoulder, and James had to look away, his vision blurring. Dr. Harper stood and approached Bella, her stethoscope ready. As she listened to Bella's breathing and heart, her brow furrowed. She checked again, moving the stethoscope to different positions. Something in her expression changed. "James," she said slowly, returning to her desk, "there might be another way." He looked up, afraid to hope. Dr. Harper's hand moved to her desk drawer, pulling out a small notepad. She wrote something quickly, her movements almost furtive. "What I'm about to suggest isn't exactly conventional," she said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. On it was a phone number and an address he didn't recognize. "But I've seen results that seem almost miraculous." James stared at the paper, confusion mixing with desperate hope. Dr. Harper lowered her voice. "I can't tell you more than this. It's not something we discuss openly in professional circles. But if anyone deserves a chance, it's Bella." The trip back to the trailer was difficult. Bella's steps were uncertain, and she balked slightly at the ramp. James coaxed her gently, each labored breath she took squeezing his heart. Once she was secured, he climbed into the truck's cab, Dr. Harper's note burning a hole in his pocket. As he steered the truck homeward, his mind raced with possibilities and doubts. Could he trust this mysterious suggestion? Was he foolish to even consider it? The kitchen clock ticked steadily as James sat at his worn oak table, Dr. Harper's note lying before him like a lifeline. The paper had become soft at the edges from his constant handling throughout the day, the creases deepening with each nervous fold and unfold. Outside, snow swirled against the windows, and the wind whistled through the eaves of the old farmhouse, making the window frames shudder. From the barn, carried on the night air, he could hear Bella's labored breathing, each wheeze a reminder of time slipping away, each struggle piercing his heart. His fingers trembled as he reached for the landline phone, the ancient plastic cool against his palm. The numbers were barely legible in Dr. Harper's hurried handwriting, but he dialed carefully, his heart pounding with each ring, each second of silence stretching like an eternity. "Yeah," a gruff voice answered, making James second-guess himself, his courage nearly failing. Dr. Harper gave me this number. About my horse, Bella." His voice sounded smaller than he intended, weighted with desperation. The voice softened slightly, though remained cautious, like a man used to guarding secrets. "Harper sent you? What's wrong with your horse?" James explained Bella's condition, his voice catching as he described her decline. The man on the other end, Cyrus he called himself, listened quietly, offering only the occasional grunt of acknowledgement. "Listen carefully," Cyrus said, his tone dropping to barely above a whisper. "Bring her at dawn tomorrow. Take Route 27 past Miller's Creek, then turn left at the abandoned grain silo. Follow that road until you see 3 maple trees wrapped in blue ribbons. turn right onto the dirt road there." "But what exactly?" James started, questions burning in his throat. "No questions," Cyrus cut him off firmly. "This is Bella's only chance, but it depends on absolute secrecy. Tell no one where you're going. Understand?" After hanging up, James moved through the house with purpose, gathering supplies with trembling hands but determined focus. He packed a thermos of coffee, some sandwiches, and Bella's medications, checking each item twice. In the mudroom, he pulled out his heavy winter coat and boots, setting them by the door for morning, arranging them as carefully as a soldier preparing for battle. The barn was quiet except for the soft rustling of hay and Bella's breathing, the familiar sense of sweet feed and leather wrapping around him like a comfort. James found her lying down in her stall, her sides heaving with each breath, her once glossy coat now dull in the dim light. When she saw him, she lifted her head slightly, offering a weak whinny that broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. James settled onto a hay bale beside her stall, the rough straw poking through his jeans. "Sarah always said you were the strongest horse she'd ever known," he murmured, reaching through the bars to stroke her neck, feeling the familiar warmth of her skin. "Remember that summer day when she braided flowers into your mane for the county fair? You stood so patient and proud, like you knew how beautiful you looked." Bella's ears twitched toward his voice as he spoke, and James continued sharing memories, each one a prayer for tomorrow's uncertainty. The snow fell steadily outside, blanketing the world in white, while inside the barn an old man sat with his beloved horse, holding on to hope like a flickering flame in the darkness. Dawn crept through the fog like a hesitant visitor, casting everything in shades of gray. James stood in his driveway, checking his phone's map for the third time while Bella waited patiently in the trailer. The direction seemed to lead nowhere, just a maze of back roads cutting through dense woodland. He tucked the phone into his coat pocket and gave Bella a reassuring pat through the trailer window. "We'll figure this out together, old girl," he whispered, his breath visible in the cold morning air. The trailer creaked as Bella shifted her weight, her soft wicker betraying her discomfort. James climbed into his truck, his fingers tight around the steering wheel as he pulled away from the familiar comfort of his farm. The journey stretched longer than expected. 2 hours passed as James navigated increasingly remote roads, the pavement eventually giving way to gravel. Trees pressed in from both sides, their branches forming tunnels over the narrow lane. Each turn made his stomach clench with uncertainty, but he pressed on, guided by Cyrus's cryptic directions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, James spotted the 3 maple trees with their blue ribbons fluttering in the winter breeze. The dirt road beyond them wound through thick woods before opening onto a clearing. There, standing weathered but proud, was a large barn, its red paint faded to a soft russet. As James carefully backed the trailer toward the barn entrance, a tall figure emerged from the shadows. The man approached with purposeful strides, his work boots crunching on the frozen ground. This must be Cyrus. His face was lined with age, but his movements were strong and assured. "You must be James," Cyrus called out, raising a hand in greeting. His voice was warm, nothing like the gruff tone from their phone conversation. "Let's get your girl settled." Together they helped Bella from the trailer. She stumbled slightly, but Cyrus was there instantly, his hands gentle but confident on her flank. "Easy there, sweetheart," he murmured, and Bella's ears pricked forward at his voice. The tension in her body seemed to ease under his touch. "My daughter Lily will be here soon to take a look at her," Cyrus explained as they led Bella into the barn. "She's the one with the healing touch." Inside, the barn was surprisingly well maintained despite its exterior appearance. Fresh straw covered the floor, and the air smelled of sweet hay and cedar. Cyrus guided Bella to a spacious stall where a thick bed of straw awaited her. James settled onto a wooden bench while Cyrus tended to Bella, mixing herbs into her water bucket and checking her vital signs with practiced ease. The barn's rustic beams and worn floors spoke of history, but James noticed modern equipment tucked away in corners, things he didn't quite recognize, but that looked expensive and new. Bella's breathing seemed to even out as she rested in the straw, her eyes half closed under Cyrus's ministrations. James watched them both, hope and anxiety warring in his chest as he waited for Lily's arrival. James sat on the wooden bench in the barn, his weathered hand moving rhythmically through Bella's mane. The familiar texture of her coat beneath his fingers brought back memories of better days. Around him, the barn creaked softly in the winter wind, and the woods beyond maintained their mysterious silence. The quiet was suddenly broken by the distinct sound of tires on gravel. James straightened, his hand pausing mid-stroke as Bella's ears perked up at the noise. Through the barn's wide doors, he could see a blue pickup truck winding its way down the path. The vehicle came to a stop, and a woman stepped out, her boots hitting the ground with purpose. She reached back into the cab to retrieve a large medical bag that looked well used but carefully maintained. As she approached, James noticed her confident stride and the gentle smile that lit up her face. "You must be James," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Lily. Dad told me about Bella." Her handshake was firm, and her eyes held a warmth that immediately put James at ease. Without wasting time, she moved to Bella's side, setting her bag down carefully. "Let's take a look at this beautiful girl," Lily murmured, running her hands along Bella's neck. Her touch was gentle but sure, and Bella remained calm under her examination. As Lily worked, she explained her approach to James. "What I do here isn't exactly conventional," she admitted, pulling out various instruments and bottles from her bag. "I combine modern medicine with natural remedies that most vets won't consider. Sometimes healing requires thinking outside the box." She demonstrated as she talked, showing James the mixture she was preparing, a combination of medical pain relievers and natural anti-inflammatory herbs. "Some people think this is too risky," she said, her voice taking on a determined edge. "But I've seen it work miracles when nothing else would." James watched intently as Lily administered the treatment, noting how Bella's breathing seemed to ease almost immediately. The mare's eyes, which had been dull with pain, brightened slightly. As darkness began to settle outside, Lily packed up her supplies and turned to James. "There's a small room in the farmhouse where you can stay," she offered. "It would be good for you to be close by during these first few days of treatment." James glanced at Bella, then back at the darkening road beyond the barn. The thought of leaving her here, even in capable hands, made his chest tight. After a moment's consideration, he nodded, accepting Lily's offer. The first rays of sunlight had barely touched the horizon when James was awakened by the sound of activity outside his window. He pulled on his worn jacket and stepped out of the farmhouse into the crisp morning air. The scene before him was one of quiet industry. Cyrus moved from pen to pen, distributing feed and checking on various animals. James watched as Cyrus tossed grain to a small flock of chickens, his movements practiced and efficient. The old barn, though weathered, seemed to pulse with life. A cat darted between buildings, and somewhere in the distance, a rooster announced the dawn. "Morning," Cyrus called out, waving James over. "Hope the noise didn't wake you too early." "Not at all," James replied, falling into step beside him. "Need any help?" As they worked together, Cyrus began sharing the story of the farm. "This place," he said, pausing to check a water trough, "it's more than just a farm. It's a sanctuary for the ones others have given up on." He gestured toward a three-legged goat contentedly munching on hay. "Every animal here has a story." They made their way to Bella's stall, where she greeted them with a soft nicker. Though still weak, her eyes seemed brighter, and she held her head higher than the day before. "Lily's always had a way with animals," Cyrus continued, his voice softening. "But after we lost her brother—" He trailed off, busying himself with adjusting Bella's blanket. "Well, let's just say it became her calling." James nodded, sensing the weight behind Cyrus's words. He focused on stroking Bella's neck, giving Cyrus time to collect himself. The smell of coffee soon drew them to the farmhouse kitchen, where Lily was setting out plates of eggs and toast. Morning light streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow over the worn wooden table. "I've been thinking about Bella's treatment plan," Lily said, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. She pulled out a notebook filled with careful notes and diagrams. "We'll start with daily treatments, a combination of medicine and natural remedies. But I need you to understand, James, this won't be a quick fix." She outlined each step carefully, explaining the potential challenges they might face. "There will be good days and bad days," she cautioned. "We'll need patience." James listened intently, watching as she detailed her plans with the same care she'd shown while treating Bella. Her dedication was evident in every word, every gesture. For the first time since Bella had fallen ill, he felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The morning sun filtered through the barn's weathered boards as Lily organized her supplies on a small table, her movements precise and practiced. Various bottles of natural supplements lined up next to more modern medical equipment, including a compact laser therapy device that gleamed in the filtered light. The scent of hay and herbs mingled in the air, creating a soothing atmosphere. "Would you like to help?" she asked James, who had been hovering nearby, his hands fidgeting with nervous energy. "It's always good to have an extra pair of hands, especially from someone who knows Bella so well." James stepped forward eagerly, relief evident in his expression. "Just tell me what to do. I want to learn everything." Lily walked him through each item, explaining their purpose with patient detail, her voice warm and encouraging. "This laser helps reduce inflammation," she demonstrated, holding up the sleek device. "And these herbs here, they're special blends I learned about during my time in Mongolia, working with their horses. The nomads there have centuries of wisdom about natural healing." As they prepared Bella's treatment, James watched carefully, his hands mimicking Lily's movements as she showed him how to mix the supplements. The mare stood quietly in her stall, ears forward and alert, seeming to sense the importance of their work. Her gentle breathing provided a steady rhythm to their preparations. "You mentioned Mongolia," James said, measuring out a powder with careful precision, his weathered hands steady. "Did you study there? It seems so far from everything we know here." Lily's eyes lit up as she adjusted the laser settings, her passion evident in her animated response. "I spent 2 years traveling, learning from horse healers around the world. Traditional vets thought I was crazy, but I saw results they couldn't explain. The healing methods I witnessed were incredible." James paused, his brow furrowing with concern. "But isn't this, well, illegal? Working without a license? I don't want you to get in trouble for helping us." "I understand your concern," Lily replied, her voice steady as she began the laser treatment on Bella's joints. "But I chose results over recognition. Every animal I help is proof that sometimes we need to look beyond conventional wisdom. There's more than one way to heal." They worked together in comfortable silence, James supporting Bella while Lily administered various treatments. The mare's responses were encouraging. Her breathing seemed easier, and her eyes showed more life than they had in weeks. She even nickered softly when Lily praised her cooperation. As the afternoon wore on, Bella began showing marked improvement. She stood straighter, her head held higher, and even walked to her hay net to nibble, something she hadn't done in days. Her coat seemed to shine with renewed energy in the afternoon light. The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks as James, Lily, and Cyrus gathered on the farmhouse porch. They sat in comfortable wooden chairs that creaked gently beneath them, watching as the farm settled into its evening routine. Bella could be seen through the barn door, contentedly munching on her hay, her tail swishing peacefully. "I never thought I'd see her eating like that again," James said softly, his voice thick with emotion. His eyes never left the barn, as if afraid the improvement might vanish if he looked away. Lily smiled, her eyes on the peaceful scene before them. "She's a fighter. Sometimes they just need someone to believe in them. And you never stopped believing, James." The evening air grew cool as they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their own thoughts while watching the day fade into dusk. The first crickets began their evening chorus, adding nature's melody to the peaceful moment. The morning sun cast long shadows across the barn as James and Cyrus worked side by side, replacing worn boards along the wall. Their hammers rang out in steady rhythm while sawdust drifted through beams of light. "See that horse over there?" Cyrus pointed to a dappled mare grazing in the distance. "Lily found her abandoned, half-starved in a ditch. Most folks said she was too far gone." He wiped his brow with a bandana. "Now look at her, healthy as can be." James paused, taking in the sight. "How many animals has she saved?" "Lost count," Cyrus chuckled softly. "Each one's got a story, like that three-legged dog by the fence, hit by a car. Vets wanted to put him down. Lily stayed up 3 nights straight nursing him." Later that morning, Lily called James to the barn for Bella's therapy session. She demonstrated gentle circular motions along Bella's flanks, showing James how to detect muscle tension. "Like this," Lily guided his hands. "Feel that knot? Work it slowly." James followed her instructions, and Bella's eyes softened with contentment. After the massage, they walked Bella in slow circles, supporting her weight when needed. She pressed her nose against James's shoulder afterward, making him smile. As afternoon settled in, James and Lily sat on wooden chairs outside the barn. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of hay and distant pine trees. "I couldn't take it anymore," Lily said, her voice quiet but firm. "Watching animals suffer because their owners couldn't afford treatment or because insurance wouldn't cover certain procedures." She wrapped her hands around a steaming mug. "The final straw was when we had to deny treatment to a puppy because of policy restrictions. I left the next day." James nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Bella was a wedding gift to my wife, Sarah," he shared, his voice thick with memory. "Sarah always said Bella had an old soul. They'd spend hours together in the pasture." He paused, collecting himself. "When Sarah passed, Bella was all I had left." The setting sun painted the sky in soft oranges and pinks as James watched Bella walk along the fence line. Her steps were steadier now, more confident than they'd been in weeks. The sight made his heart swell. "She's doing well," Lily said, coming to stand beside him. "We'll take it day by day, but she's fighting hard." That evening, James sat at the small desk in his room, writing in a notebook by lamplight. Never thought strangers could become family so quickly. Their kindness, their dedication, it's given Bella a chance I never dreamed possible. Maybe some angels wear work boots instead of wings. The sun hadn't yet risen when James woke, his internal clock still set to farm time. He pulled on his worn boots and jacket, heading to check on Bella in the pre-dawn darkness. As he approached the barn, hushed voices caught his attention, urgent whispers and the soft clink of metal against metal. Following the sound, James made his way past Bella's stall toward a sectioned-off area he hadn't noticed before. The voices grew clearer, and a bright light spilled from beneath the door. "Steady now," Lily's voice came through clearly. "Almost there." James pushed the door open slowly. The sight stopped him in his tracks. Under powerful surgical lamps, Lily stood bent over a chestnut horse laid out on its side. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she worked on what appeared to be a severe leg injury. Modern medical equipment surrounded her: monitors, surgical tools, and devices James had only seen in veterinary hospitals. Cyrus noticed him first, looking up from where he assisted Lily. "James!" Lily glanced over her shoulder, her face masked but her eyes showing surprise. She didn't stop working as she spoke. "I know this looks concerning," she said calmly, "but this mare would have been put down at any regular clinic. Compound fracture. Too expensive. Too risky, they said." James watched as her skilled hands continued their work. The equipment looked new, professional, clearly obtained through unofficial channels. His stomach churned with unease. "How often do you do this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "As often as needed," Lily replied, focused on her task. "Every animal here was somebody's lost cause. Too expensive, too difficult, too old." She straightened up, checking a monitor. "I couldn't stand by and watch them die, just because the system said their lives weren't worth saving." James shifted uncomfortably. "But operating without a license, if you're caught—" "Then I'll face those consequences," Lily said firmly. "But I won't stop helping animals that deserve a chance. Not while I have the skills to save them." The ethical weight of the situation pressed heavily on James as he returned to his room. He sat on the edge of his bed, mind racing. Everything he'd seen was technically illegal. Unauthorized surgeries, unlicensed practice. Yet he couldn't deny the good Lily was doing. How many animals had she saved that others had written off? From the barn, Bella's soft whinny drifted through his window. The sound hit him like a physical touch, reminding him that his own beloved mare might have been yet another lost cause, if not for Lily's unconventional methods. He thought of the chestnut horse he'd just seen, another animal getting a second chance at life. Standing at his window, James watched the sunrise paint the sky in soft pinks and golds. He'd come here desperate to save Bella, and now he found himself tangled in something much bigger. Despite his concerns, he knew he couldn't walk away. Not when he'd seen firsthand the miracles Lily created in that barn. James found Lily in the barn early the next morning, his footsteps heavy with purpose. She was checking on Bella, but turned when she heard him approach. "We need to talk about what I saw last night," he said, his voice firm but quiet. "The surgery, the equipment. Do you understand the risks you're taking? Not just for yourself, but for everyone here?" Lily straightened up, her chin lifting slightly. "Of course I understand the risks. I live with them every day." "If you get caught—" "If I get caught, I'll deal with it," Lily interrupted, her eyes flashing. "But what's the alternative? Let animals die because some bureaucrat decided their treatment wasn't cost-effective?" "The laws exist for a reason," James argued, his voice rising slightly. "You can't just—" "Can't just what?" Lily stepped closer, her passion evident in every word. "Can't save animals that deserve a chance? Those laws you're defending, they're why vets told you Bella couldn't be saved. They're why countless animals are put down every day when they could be treated." "You're being reckless," James shot back. "Operating without a license, running an illegal sanctuary. And you're here because those same laws failed you and Bella." Lily's voice cracked with emotion. "You don't trust my judgment? Fine. But I've dedicated my life to saving animals that the system abandoned." Their heated exchange was interrupted by a soft whinny. Both turned to see Bella standing in her stall, head raised and ears forward, a sight that would have seemed impossible just days ago. The mare's gentle eyes moved between them, as if questioning their conflict. The fight seemed to drain from both of them as they watched Bella. James's shoulders slumped slightly. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I shouldn't have accused you of being reckless. It's just seeing that surgery last night, realizing the scope of what you're doing here, it scared me." Lily's expression softened. "I know it's a lot to take in. I should have been more upfront about everything from the beginning." "Moving forward," James said, "I'd like to know more about what's happening here. No more surprises." Lily nodded slowly. "Fair enough. How about I show you more of Bella's treatment plan? Teach you some of the therapy techniques?" "I'd like that," James agreed, reaching out to stroke Bella's nose. The mare leaned into his touch, seemingly satisfied that peace had been restored. The morning sun filtered through the barn windows as Lily demonstrated the proper way to prepare Bella's medicine. She measured the herbs carefully, explaining each one's purpose to James. "This is chamomile," she said, holding up a dried flower. "It helps with inflammation. And this," she picked up another herb, "is echinacea for immune support. We blend them with her regular medicine to boost its effectiveness." James watched intently, taking mental notes. "And you learned all this during your travels?" "Years of study and practice," Lily nodded, showing him how to mix the ingredients. "Here, you try now." With careful movements, James followed her instructions. His hands were steady as he measured each component, and Lily smiled approvingly. Throughout the day, they fell into a rhythm. James helped with Bella's feeding schedule, learned massage techniques for her muscles, and assisted during her therapy sessions. Watching Lily work, he noticed how she anticipated each animal's needs, how her movements were both confident and gentle. During a break, they sat on hay bales near Bella's stall. Lily's eyes grew distant as she watched the mare drink water. "My brother Michael would have loved this place," she said softly. "He served 3 tours overseas. When he came back, he struggled to adjust, but working with animals helped him find peace." James listened quietly as Lily continued. "He dreamed of creating a sanctuary like this, somewhere that gave second chances to animals others had given up on." Her voice wavered slightly. "We were planning it together when the accident happened." "I'm so sorry," James said gently. "This place, what I do here, it's for him as much as for the animals." Lily wiped her eyes quickly. "He taught me that sometimes the biggest risks are worth taking if they can save a life." James looked at Bella, who was standing stronger than she had in weeks. The mare's progress was living proof of Lily's words. As evening settled over the sanctuary, James helped with the final feeding rounds. Each task now felt meaningful, part of something larger than himself. In her stall, Bella rested peacefully, her breathing steady and strong. Heading to his room, James felt a deep respect for Lily and her mission. The risks she took weren't reckless. They were acts of love and dedication, born from a promise to her brother and a commitment to giving hope to the hopeless. James woke with a start, his heart leaping at the sound of a loud whinny echoing from the barn. It wasn't the weak, labored sound he'd grown accustomed to. This was strong and clear, like bells ringing through the crisp morning air. He threw on his coat and rushed outside, his boots crunching on the frosty ground, sending puffs of steam into the cold dawn. Inside the barn, he stopped short at the sight before him. Bella was up, walking around her stall with newfound energy, her hooves making soft thuds against the packed earth. Her ears were perked forward, and her eyes held a brightness he hadn't seen in weeks, the rich brown depths sparkling with life. "Look at you, girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he reached out to stroke her velvet nose. Lily appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, her face glowing with quiet satisfaction. "Perfect timing," she said, smiling. "I think Bella's ready for the next phase of her treatment." They spent the morning introducing gentle exercises, the kind that would build her strength without overtaxing her recovering body. James held Bella's lead rope as Lily guided them through slow walks around the barnyard, her experienced hands occasionally adjusting their positioning. The mare's steps were careful but steady, her head held higher with each circuit they completed. "Easy now," James murmured as they made another lap, his weathered hand patting her shoulder. "That's my girl." Lily watched them closely, making notes on her clipboard, her eyes missing nothing. "She's responding better than I hoped," she said, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "But remember, recovery isn't always a straight line. There might be days when she seems tired or takes a step backward." James nodded, patting Bella's neck, feeling the warmth of her beneath his palm. As they walked, he noticed other animals around the sanctuary. A three-legged dog playing fetch with boundless enthusiasm. A limping horse grazing peacefully in the morning sun. A blind cat sunning itself on a windowsill, purring contentedly. Each one was a testament to Lily's dedication and skill, living proof of her healing touch. "How long before she's back to full strength?" James asked, hope coloring his voice. "It's hard to say," Lily replied, her expression thoughtful. "We'll take it day by day. The important thing is to be patient and consistent with her exercises." They continued working with Bella until late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the barnyard. James marveled at how naturally the mare responded to his guidance, their connection growing stronger with each step, like an invisible thread binding them together. As evening approached, James sat on a hay bale in the barn, watching Bella rest. She stood relaxed in her stall, occasionally turning to look at him with bright eyes that seemed to hold a world of understanding. The hope he'd been carrying like a fragile flame now burned steady and strong in his chest, warming him from the inside out. Lily came by for a final check, examining Bella's vital signs with gentle, practiced movements. "We're making real progress, James," she said softly, her words carrying the weight of professional certainty. "Real progress." The crunch of tires on gravel made James's heart skip a beat. Through the farmhouse window, he watched a sleek government vehicle pull into the driveway, its official markings gleaming in the morning sun. A man in a crisp suit stepped out, his polished shoes a stark contrast to the dusty ground. The clipboard in his hand seemed to radiate authority. James's mouth went dry as he recognized the Animal Welfare Agency logo on the car door. He slipped quietly out the back door, making his way to the barn where Bella stood in her stall. Through the barn's weathered walls, he could hear Cyrus' steady voice greeting the official. "Good morning, sir. What brings you out to our little corner of the world?" "Routine inspection," the man replied, his tone clipped and professional. "We've received some concerns about unlicensed veterinary practices in the area." James held his breath, gently stroking Bella's neck to keep her quiet. The mare seemed to sense the tension, standing perfectly still. "Well, as you can see, we're just a small family farm," Cyrus said smoothly. "My daughter and I rescue abandoned animals when we can. Nothing more than that." Footsteps crunched on gravel as Lily joined them outside. "Would you like to see our property permits?" she offered, her voice steady despite the strain James could hear beneath it. The official's questions continued as they walked the perimeter of the property. Cyrus and Lily expertly guided him away from the barn, discussing fencing regulations and proper feed storage instead. When the sound of voices finally faded, James let out a long breath. Bella nudged his shoulder gently, as if offering comfort. Later, after the official's car disappeared down the dusty road, Lily found James in the barn. Her face was drawn with worry as she leaned against the stall door. "Someone must have reported us," she said quietly. "Maybe saw too much activity around here." James nodded, understanding the weight of her words. "What will you do?" "Keep going," Lily replied, her jaw set with determination. "These animals need us. Bella needs us." "Whatever you need," James said, placing a weathered hand on her shoulder. "I'm here to help. We all are." They stood in silence for a moment, watching Bella contentedly munch her hay. The threat of discovery hung in the air between them, but so did their shared resolve. The risks had grown, but looking at Bella's bright eyes and strong stance, James knew they couldn't give up now. James stepped into the barn early that morning, his boots crunching on the fresh hay. The familiar sound of Bella's gentle breathing was different somehow, too shallow, too quiet. His heart dropped as he approached her stall. "Bella?" His voice trembled as he reached for her. The mare lay on her side, barely responding to his touch. Her eyes, usually bright and alert, were dull and half-closed. "No, no, no." "Lily!" James shouted, his voice echoing through the barn. "Something's wrong with Bella!" Footsteps pounded against the wooden floor as Lily rushed in, her hair still messy from sleep. She took one look at Bella and immediately dropped to her knees beside the horse, medical bag already in hand. "How long has she been like this?" Lily asked, running expert hands along Bella's neck and sides. "I just found her," James whispered, watching helplessly. "She was fine last night. I should have checked on her during the night. I should have—" "James, stop," Lily said firmly, pulling out a stethoscope. "This isn't your fault." She listened intently to Bella's breathing, her face growing serious. "There's an infection brewing. It must have been developing slowly, masking itself behind her other symptoms." James slumped against the stall wall. "Can you help her?" "Yes, but we need to act fast." Lily was already preparing supplies from her medical bag. "I'll need to perform a procedure to drain the infection and start her on strong antibiotics." Throughout the day, James barely left Bella's side. He watched as Lily worked with steady hands, administering medications and monitoring vital signs. Every labored breath from Bella felt like a knife in his heart. "Come on, girl," he whispered, stroking her mane. "You've got to fight." He told her stories about his late wife, about their years together on the farm, anything to keep her spirit connected to this world. Lily worked tirelessly, checking temperatures, adjusting medications, and watching for any change in Bella's condition. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. As darkness fell outside, Lily finally straightened up from checking Bella's vitals. "She's stabilizing," she announced, exhaustion evident in her voice. "The next few days will be critical. She'll need round-the-clock monitoring, but I think we caught it in time." Relief flooded through James as he settled onto a hay bale beside Bella's stall. The mare's breathing had steadied, though she still looked weak. He reached through the slats to touch her nose, feeling the warm breath against his palm. "I'll do whatever it takes," he whispered, both to Bella and himself. "Whatever you need, we'll get through this together." 3 days later, James stirred before dawn, his heart racing as he made his way to the barn. The morning air was crisp, and frost covered the ground in delicate patterns, crunching softly beneath his boots. His hands trembled slightly as he pushed open the heavy barn door, and his breath caught in his throat. There stood Bella, alert and steady in her stall. Her eyes, bright and clear, fixed on him with that familiar warmth he'd missed so much. Her breathing was steady and strong, nothing like the labored gasps of the past few days. The difference was remarkable. Even her coat seemed to shine with renewed vitality in the dim light of early morning. "Lily!" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "Come quick!" Lily appeared moments later, her boots clicking against the wooden floor, her hair hastily pulled back in a messy ponytail. When she saw Bella standing tall, a broad smile spread across her face. "Would you look at that?" she said softly, approaching the stall. Bella nickered softly, extending her neck to greet them both. Her ears pricked forward with interest. Lily performed a thorough examination, checking vital signs and running her hands along Bella's sides, nodding with satisfaction at each positive sign. "The infection's cleared completely," she explained, patting Bella's neck. "The combination of antibiotics and the holistic treatments worked exactly as we hoped. Your dedication made all the difference, James. Those nights you spent with her, talking to her, keeping her spirit up, that matters more than you know." The smell of coffee and bacon drifted in from the farmhouse, and soon Cyrus appeared with a tray of food, carefully balancing plates piled high with scrambled eggs and toast. "Thought we could all use a proper breakfast," he said, setting up an impromptu picnic on a hay bale, spreading out napkins with careful attention. As they shared the hearty meal, James found himself studying the sanctuary with new eyes. The worn buildings and basic equipment told a story of dedication despite limited resources. Paint peeled from the walls, and some of the fencing clearly needed repair. But there was an undeniable warmth to the place. His mind began turning over possibilities, ways he might help strengthen this haven that had saved Bella's life. "You know," he said between bites of toast, brushing crumbs from his shirt, "I've got some experience with fundraising from my days on the school board. Maybe we could organize something for the sanctuary." Lily's eyes lit up at the suggestion, but before she could respond, Bella whinnied softly, drawing their attention. She was pawing at the ground, eager to move, her whole demeanor showing impatience to be outside. "I think someone's ready for a walk," Lily said with a laugh. James led Bella out into the late afternoon sunshine, her steps sure and steady beside him. The mare pressed her nose against his shoulder as they walked, a gesture so familiar it brought tears to his eyes. They made a slow circuit around the closest paddock, Bella's strength evident in every step, her tail swishing contentedly behind her. From the porch, Lily watched them with a knowing smile, her faith in Bella's recovery growing stronger by the minute. The morning sun cast long shadows across the frost-covered ground, promising the start of a beautiful day. James stood in the small pasture near the barn, watching Bella graze contentedly in the afternoon sun. Her coat gleamed with renewed health, and her movements were fluid and strong, a far cry from her condition just weeks ago. The sight brought tears to his eyes. "You know, girl," he said softly, running his hand along her neck, "Sarah would have loved to see you like this." Bella lifted her head at the mention of his late wife's name, her ears perking forward. "Remember how she used to bring you carrots every morning? She'd slip them to you when she thought I wasn't looking." He chuckled softly. "But I always knew." After Bella's therapy session later that day, James found himself walking beside Lily through the sanctuary's sprawling grounds. The air was crisp, and fallen leaves crunched beneath their feet. "That's Maxwell over there," Lily pointed to a three-legged dog romping in a fenced yard. "Everyone said he'd never walk again after the accident. Now look at him." The dog barked happily, chasing butterflies. "And there's Luna," she gestured to a one-eyed horse grazing peacefully. "She was scheduled for euthanasia after a trailer accident. Now she's teaching kids with disabilities about confidence." As they rounded a gentle slope, James noticed a small stone beneath an old oak tree. Fresh flowers lay at its base. Lily slowed her pace, her expression softening with sadness. "That's for my brother, Kyle," she said quietly. James listened intently as Lily described how Kyle would spend hours with injured animals, how his patience and gentle touch seemed to heal more than just physical wounds. Her voice cracked as she explained how his death had driven her to make his dream a reality. "I understand," James said softly. "After Sarah passed, Bella became my reason to get up every morning. When she got sick..." He shook his head, remembering the despair. "I was ready to give up. Finding this place, finding you, it saved more than just Bella." They made their way to the farmhouse as evening settled in. The crackling fireplace cast warm shadows across the worn wooden floors. Lily turned to James, her expression determined. "I promise you, James, I'll do everything in my power to make sure Bella has many happy years ahead of her." James nodded, feeling a warmth of hope spread through his chest as he watched the flames dance in the fireplace. The morning sun cast long shadows across the sanctuary's barn as Lily performed her final examinations of Bella. Her hands moved with practiced precision, checking vital signs and muscle tone. James watched, his heart both heavy and light, as Lily straightened up with a smile. "She's ready to go home, James," Lily announced, patting Bella's neck. "Her recovery has exceeded all my expectations." James nodded, his throat tight with emotion as he began gathering Bella's things. Each item he packed reminded him of their journey here: the special feed buckets, the therapy equipment, the fresh hay they'd used during rehabilitation. The past weeks had transformed not just Bella, but him as well. Before he could finish loading the trailer, Lily appeared with something wrapped in soft cloth. "I have something for you both," she said, carefully unfolding the package to reveal a beautiful handmade leather bridle. The craftsmanship was exquisite, with intricate tooling along the edges. "Cyrus and I worked on it together," Lily explained, running her fingers over the leather, "to remind you of Bella's journey and the strength she showed here." James took the bridle with trembling hands. "I don't know how to thank you both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done for us." Cyrus stepped forward, placing a strong hand on James's shoulder. "You're family now," he said simply. "That's what matters." Bella seemed to sense the significance of the moment. She stepped forward, touching her nose gently to Lily's cheek, then Cyrus's, drawing tearful laughs from everyone. Her eyes were bright, her movements confident as James led her to the trailer. The drive home felt different from the desperate journey they'd made weeks ago. Sunlight filtered through the trees, and James could hear Bella's occasional soft nickering from the trailer. He thought about Lily's dedication, Cyrus's quiet strength, and the sanctuary that had given them both a second chance. As they turned onto the familiar road leading to his farm, James noticed several vehicles parked along the fence. Mrs. Carter stood at the gate, along with other neighbors who'd known Bella since she was young. Their faces lit up as James pulled in. "We had to see it for ourselves," Mrs. Carter called out, stepping forward as James parked. "Is it true? Is she really better?" James smiled, climbing down from the truck. The gathered crowd watched in amazement as he opened the trailer, and Bella emerged with graceful steps, her coat gleaming in the sunlight. She held her head high, looking nothing like the weak, suffering animal they'd last seen. "Good Lord," someone whispered. "It's a miracle." "How did you do it?" Mrs. Carter asked, her eyes wide with wonder. James reached up to touch the new bridle hanging in his truck, thinking of Lily and Cyrus and their hidden sanctuary. "Sometimes," he said carefully, "you just have to trust in good people and second chances." James opened the gate to the main pasture, and Bella stepped through with confident strides. The morning dew still clung to the grass, sparkling in the early sunlight. He watched as she lifted her head, taking in the familiar sense of home. Without hesitation, she broke into a gentle trot, circling the field with grace that seemed impossible just weeks ago. "Look at you, girl," James whispered, his eyes misting over. The sight of her strong, healthy movements brought a warmth to his chest he hadn't felt in years. Throughout the morning, cars began pulling up to the farm. Mrs. Carter arrived first, bringing her signature apple pie. Then came the Hendersons from down the road, followed by old Tom Wilson and his grandson. Each visitor marveled at Bella's transformation, their faces lighting up as she cantered past the fence. "It's like seeing a different horse," Mrs. Carter remarked, offering James a slice of pie. "Where did you say this sanctuary was?" James chose his words carefully. "It's run by some very special people who understand animals in a way most don't." He shared what he could about Lily's dedication and expertise, watching as his neighbors nodded with growing interest. "We should help them," Tom Wilson declared, pulling out his checkbook. "People doing good work like that deserve support." Back in his study that afternoon, James sat at his desk and pulled out his favorite writing paper. The words flowed easily as he began his letter to Lily. "Dear Lily, Bella has settled back home beautifully. Every time I watch her run in the pasture, I'm reminded of the miracle you and Cyrus worked. But more than that, I'm grateful for the lesson you taught me about faith and perseverance." He included a check with the letter, knowing it was just the beginning of his support for the sanctuary. As he wrote, he could hear the occasional whinny from outside, Bella's voice strong and clear, no longer weakened by illness. That evening, James settled into his favorite armchair by the fireplace. On the mantel, the photograph of his wife on their wedding day showed her astride a young Bella, both of them radiating joy. He picked up the frame, running his fingers over the glass. "We did it, Sarah," he said softly. "We saved her." The familiar ache of missing his wife felt different now, gentler, more peaceful. Through the window, he could see Bella grazing in the twilight, her silhouette strong against the setting sun. In saving her, he'd found a way to honor Sarah's memory and discovered a new purpose along the way. James placed the photograph back on the mantel, feeling truly at peace for the first time since Sarah's passing. Bella's soft nickering drifted through the evening air, a sound of contentment that echoed his own. The government official's black sedan pulled into James's driveway, sending a chill down his spine. He recognized the man immediately, the same stern-faced inspector who had visited the sanctuary weeks ago. James stepped onto his porch, forcing a polite smile as the official approached. "Mr. Thompson," the man said, pulling out his notepad, "I'd like to ask you some questions about your horse's remarkable recovery." James's heart quickened, but he kept his voice steady. "Of course. Would you like to see Bella? She's doing wonderfully." The official's eyes narrowed. "I'm more interested in the details of her treatment. The records show you had scheduled euthanasia with Dr. Harper, yet here she is, completely recovered. Can you explain that?" "She received excellent care from some very talented people," James replied carefully. "Would these people happen to include an unlicensed practitioner named Lily Carson?" James straightened his shoulders, thinking of Bella's transformation and all the other animals Lily had saved. "Lily Carson saved my horse's life when everyone else had given up. She's dedicated her life to helping animals that others would put down." "Without proper licensing or oversight," the official countered. "With more skill and compassion than I've seen in any licensed facility," James shot back. "Look at Bella. She's living proof." The official jotted something in his notebook. "Mr. Thompson, I should inform you that Ms. Carson's activities are under investigation. There may be serious consequences." With that warning, he turned and left. James waited until the sedan disappeared down the road before rushing to his phone. He called Lily, warning her about the visit and the implied threat. After hanging up, he sat at his kitchen table, determination building inside him. He wouldn't let Lily face this alone. Within hours, James had called everyone he knew in town. Mrs. Carter spread the word through her church group, while Tom Wilson reached out to the local Farmers Association. By evening, James's living room was packed with neighbors, all eager to hear Bella's story. Lily Carson didn't just save Bella, James told the crowd. She saved countless animals that traditional vets had written off. Are we going to let bureaucracy shut down someone who's doing so much good? The response was immediate and overwhelming. People began sharing stories of their own experiences with difficult veterinary cases. Mrs. Carter started drafting a petition, while others wrote heartfelt letters describing Bella's transformation. Tom Wilson's grandson, tech-savvy and passionate, created an online campaign to gather more support. James carefully packaged all the letters and petitions, along with photographs documenting Bella's recovery. He included his own detailed letter to Lily, explaining the community's response and their willingness to stand behind her. As he sealed the large envelope, he felt a surge of hope. The sanctuary had given him and Bella a second chance. Now it was their turn to fight for Lily. The town hall's wooden benches creaked under the weight of concerned citizens as James stood at the podium, his weathered hands gripping its edges. The fluorescent lights cast a harsh glow over the packed room as he cleared his throat. The familiar faces of neighbors and friends looked up at him expectantly, their expressions a mix of curiosity and support. 6 months ago, I was ready to say goodbye to my beloved horse, Bella, James began, his voice steady but emotional. She wasn't just any horse. She was a wedding gift to my late wife, Sarah. He gestured to a large photo of Bella, showing her transformation from ill to healthy, the contrast between the images drawing gasps from the audience. Thanks to Lily Carson and her sanctuary, Bella is alive and thriving today. She's not just surviving. She's running in the pasture again, playing with other horses, living the life she deserves. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as James described Lily's dedication, her innovative treatments, and the countless hours she spent nursing Bella back to health. Mrs. Carter dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, while Tom Wilson nodded vigorously from his seat. Several others leaned forward, hanging on every word of Bella's remarkable recovery story. The meeting room transformed into a hub of activity as people gathered around tables after James's speech. Sarah Miller, the local librarian, organized a letter-writing campaign, her neat handwriting filling page after page with guidelines and talking points. Bob Thompson from the hardware store started a donation collection, his carpenter's apron already holding a thick stack of checks and cash. The community's response was immediate and heartfelt, with people eagerly signing up for various committees and volunteer positions. Dr. Harper stood up next, her professional demeanor lending weight to her words. Her white coat and stethoscope gleamed under the fluorescent lights as she addressed the crowd. As a licensed veterinarian, I've witnessed Lily Carson's work firsthand. Her methods may be unconventional, but her results speak for themselves. She takes on cases that most would consider hopeless, and she succeeds. I've seen miracles happen at that sanctuary that I can't explain with traditional medicine alone. The validation from a respected professional sparked even more support. People lined up to sign petitions, sharing their own stories of struggling with difficult veterinary cases. The town clerk offered to help draft formal letters to county officials, her legal expertise proving invaluable, while the local newspaper editor promised to run a feature on Bella's recovery, already scribbling notes for the story. James worked tirelessly, coordinating with Cyrus over the phone to prepare documentation of Lily's success stories. They organized medical records, before and after photos, and testimonials from animal owners whose pets had been saved at the sanctuary. Every success story added another layer of proof to their cause, building an undeniable case for the sanctuary's importance. As the sun began to set, dozens of townspeople gathered at James's farm. Bella stood proudly in the center, her coat gleaming in the golden light, her eyes bright and alert. Children petted her, while adults positioned themselves for a group photo, their faces beaming with purpose and unity. Mr. Peterson, the retired photographer, adjusted his camera carefully, making sure to capture the perfect angle of the historic moment. "Everyone smile," he called out. "This one's for Lily." The camera clicked, capturing the moment. Bella surrounded by a sea of supportive faces, each person representing a voice raised in defense of the sanctuary that had saved her. James stood beside his horse, his hand resting gently on her neck, amazed at how his personal struggle had transformed into a community cause. The setting sun painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, as if nature itself was celebrating their solidarity. The county courthouse loomed before them, its brick facade stern and imposing in the morning light. Lily smoothed her dress nervously as she climbed the steps between James and Cyrus. Inside the hearing room, rows of wooden benches filled quickly with familiar faces from Meadow Ridge. Mr. Peterson, the government official who had inspected the sanctuary, stood at the podium first. His voice was clipped and professional as he presented photographs and documentation. "Ms. Carson has been operating without proper licensing or oversight," he stated firmly. "Her methods, while well-intentioned, pose significant risks to animal welfare and public safety." Lily's hands trembled slightly in her lap. James reached over and patted her arm gently, offering silent support. When James took the stand, his quiet strength filled the room. He described finding Bella nearly lifeless, the crushing weight of almost losing her, and the miracle of her recovery under Lily's care. "Today, Bella runs in the pasture like she did when she was young," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "That's not just good medicine, that's a gift." One by one, townspeople approached the microphone. Mrs. Carter spoke about her elderly cat that traditional vets had given up on. Tom Wilson described how Lily had saved his family's farm dog after a serious accident. Each testimony painted a picture of dedication, skill, and compassion. Dr. Harper's professional testimony carried particular weight. She stood tall in her white coat, speaking with authority about Lily's techniques. While unconventional, her methods are based on sound medical principles, she explained. "I've personally witnessed results that can only be described as extraordinary." When Lily finally rose to speak, the room fell silent. Her usual confidence wavered at first, but as she began describing her work, her passion shone through. "Every animal deserves a chance," she said, her voice growing stronger. "Sometimes that means trying new approaches, taking risks that others won't. But every success story, every animal saved, proves that this work matters." She shared the story of her brother Kyle, how his love for animals had inspired her mission. "This sanctuary isn't just about healing animals," she continued. "It's about healing hearts, bringing hope where there was none, and showing that sometimes the impossible is possible." Several officials nodded thoughtfully, while others maintained stern expressions. When the final testimony concluded, the panel announced they would need time to deliberate. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone waited. James leaned close to Lily, speaking softly. "No matter what happens, you've got all of us behind you," he assured her. "Look around. This whole town believes in you." Lily glanced around the room, taking in the sea of supportive faces. Cyrus squeezed her shoulder, and even Dr. Harper gave her an encouraging smile. They sat together, waiting for the panel's decision, united in their support of the sanctuary's mission. The panel chairwoman cleared her throat, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom like a bell through morning mist. "After careful consideration of all testimony and evidence presented, we have reached a decision regarding the Meadow Ridge Animal Sanctuary." Lily gripped James's hand so tightly her knuckles turned white as the chairwoman continued, adjusting her wire-rimmed glasses. While we acknowledge the concerns about unlicensed practice, we cannot ignore the overwhelming evidence of positive outcomes and community support. Therefore, we rule that Ms. Carson may continue her work under the following guidelines: quarterly inspections by licensed veterinarians, detailed documentation of all treatments, and regular progress reports submitted to the county board. Relief washed over Lily's face as tears sprang to her eyes, trickling down her cheeks. Cyrus wrapped her in a bear hug while the courtroom erupted in thunderous applause, the sound echoing off the wood-paneled walls. Back at James's farm that evening, cars lined the gravel driveway bumper to bumper as neighbors gathered to celebrate. The autumn air was crisp and sweet, filled with laughter and the tantalizing smell of home-cooked dishes. Mrs. Carter had brought her famous apple pie, still warm from the oven, while Tom Wilson wheeled in boxes of supplies for the sanctuary, his pickup truck loaded with donations. Under strings of twinkling lights hung between weathered fence posts, Lily moved through the crowd, accepting hugs and well wishes from faces both familiar and new. She stopped at a makeshift podium James had set up near the barn, its rough wood decorated with colorful fall mums. "I can't thank you all enough," she said, her voice wavering with emotion as she gripped the podium's edges. "This sanctuary exists because of people like you who believe in second chances." She turned to James, who stood nearby with pride shining in his eyes. "And especially you, James. You and Bella showed everyone what's possible when we don't give up." James smiled warmly as neighbors pressed checks and envelopes into Lily's hands, each contribution a promise of support for the sanctuary's future. Children darted between the adults' legs, giggling and pointing at the animals in the nearby paddocks. Lily outlined her plans to document her methods more thoroughly and work with local veterinarians to validate her treatments, her excitement evident in every gesture. As the celebration continued under the deepening sky, James wandered to the pasture fence. Bella trotted across the field, her coat gleaming like polished copper in the evening light, the new leather bridle Lily had given her catching the golden rays. She looked strong and healthy, a far cry from the weak mare he'd almost lost months ago. Lily joined him at the fence, leaning against the weathered wood that had supported generations of farmers before them. "Look at her go," she said softly, her breath visible in the cooling air. "Hard to believe how close we came to losing her." James nodded, watching Bella's confident strides across the grass still green beneath the scattered autumn leaves. The sight filled him with a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing he'd played a part in not just saving his beloved horse, but in preserving a place where other animals could find hope and healing, a legacy that would continue long after him. The late spring breeze rustled through the apple trees as James watched Bella gallop across the pasture. Her chestnut coat gleamed in the morning sun, muscles rippling with each powerful stride. 6 months had passed since their return from the sanctuary, and watching her now, no one would guess she had ever been ill. James leaned against the fence post, his weathered hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. The sight of Bella's restored vigor never failed to fill his heart with gratitude. She paused her run to graze, lifting her head occasionally to watch the road, a habit she'd developed since their time at the sanctuary. As if summoned by Bella's watchful gaze, a familiar truck appeared on the horizon. James recognized Cyrus's old pickup, with Lily in the passenger seat. Bella whinnied in greeting as they pulled up to the fence. "Look at our girl," Lily called out, climbing down from the truck. Her face lit up as Bella trotted over to the fence, pushing her nose against Lily's outstretched hand. Cyrus joined them, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables from their garden. "The sanctuary's not the same without you two around," he said, clapping James on the shoulder. Over coffee at James's kitchen table, Lily shared their news. Remember those donations from the town meeting? Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Well, we've put them to good use. We've added 2 more stalls and hired Sarah, a vet tech who believes in our methods. The community really came through, Cyrus added, his voice warm with pride. We've even got a waiting list of volunteers now. And James walked to the living room wall where he'd hung the framed photograph from the town rally. In it, dozens of smiling faces surrounded Bella, their show of support captured forever. This reminds me every day of what we accomplished together, he said, touching the frame gently. Lily stood beside him, studying the photo. You're always welcome at the sanctuary, James. You're family now, you and Bella both. They shared stories of recent sanctuary successes. A 3-legged dog learning to run again, a blind horse finding his confidence. Each tale reinforced the importance of their shared mission. As evening approached, James walked with Bella through the pasture. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, casting long shadows across the grass. He felt a familiar presence in the air, a warmth that reminded him of his wife. She would have loved seeing Bella like this, strong and full of life. Bella lifted her head and let out a joyful neigh that echoed across the field. James smiled, his heart full. The journey to save Bella had given him more than just his beloved horse back. It had shown him the power of hope, the strength of community, and the endless possibilities that open up when people choose to care. If you enjoyed the story of Grandpa James and Bella, I handpicked this next story that you will love. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.